of the lies of the world we live in. Where did these ideas come from? Who presented these concepts and ideas and belief systems to the world in the beginning? Where did it start? And then you look at the founders of the modern day religions, the reverends and the preachers and the priesthoods who founded the different philosophies and religions of today, and go back and look at each one. See, what is their story? Where did they get their money? Where did they get these ideas that they were expounding 500 years ago, or 100 years ago, 80 years ago? Where did they get these ideas from? And how did they get the money? Because you can't do anything in the world without money, period. And so, after looking at the world I live in for some 60 years, I am totally convinced that the people have no ability to protect themselves. They have no opportunity to investigate for themselves. And we now, unfortunately, because of the world we live in, we now today are living in a society, a human society on this earth, that does not in any way, shape, or form care about facts or facts that can be presented in a court and proven beyond the shadow of a doubt. It doesn't matter. We find that in court today. Today, if you go to court, it doesn't matter if you got the law book with you. You photocopied all the documents in the case, and you can show the court exactly what happened, and you can prove everything and show them what the law says. And actual point of fact, it doesn't matter in America what the facts are. Period. It doesn't matter. What matters is, what do the people think? What do the judges think? Whatever it is they think, that's the way the case is going to go. They don't care what the law says. Judges couldn't care less what the law says, because we're not living under the United States of America's legal system. We're living under something called the U.S. criminal justice system, obviously implying the criminals are in control of the justice. It's a criminal justice system, and that means it doesn't matter what the facts are. It doesn't matter what you can prove in court. What it matters is how much money is the court going to make, how much are the lawyers going to make, and the bottom line is it doesn't matter what the facts are. So I have applied that same understanding to religions, to banking, to government, to everything, and I've discovered that it worked perfectly. The religions of this world, the governments of this world, the educational colleges and universities of this world, they couldn't care less about fact of life. They have an agenda, and the agenda is in the book. And so they have book to read, and the agenda will tell you what you need to think and how you need to understand something. And so that's why today the world is so confused, because nobody seems to be able to go back to the original and look at where something started and have the intellectual honesty to to agree and to understand it and to deal with it. Most people do not have intellectual honesty, unfortunately. People are believing things. As I said, if you go into a church, they will say that you're a believer. In Christianity, if you adhere to the Christian doctrine, going to a church, you are what is called a believer. Why do they call you a believer? Because it's obvious you don't know anything, but you are given to believe in something. You're given to believe that you know and understand something. Look at the words and the terms and the concordances in the Bible, and then you begin to, if you're writing down all that you're learning about different subjects, one day you're going to come up with boxes filled with handwritten documents and handwritten notes that are telling you all of the belief systems of the world, where they're really coming from, because you begin to see the connection between Hinduism and Judaism, between Hinduism and Christianity, between Islam and Hinduism. You begin to see all the connections going back into the ancient world, and then you begin to also see the lies, the misunderstandings, the purposeful misstating of fact by the church fathers, by the different groups. And then, I've mentioned it before, there was no man on a cross in Christianity for the first 600 or 700 years. So I would say for the first 700 years of Christianity, there was no mention of, or no picture of, or no discussion of a man hanging on a cross. That didn't come till 700 years later, after Christianity was started, that they finally came up with a symbol which is now today universally accepted as a symbol for Christianity. But it wasn't used for 700 years. So how many people know that, and how many people care, and what does that mean for the belief system you have today? Well, that quite simply means that you don't know what's going on. You have no idea in the world what happened the first 600 or 700 years of Christianity. It's never been told to you. You don't know where the Vatican comes from. You have no idea about the fall of the Roman Empire and why it fell and what the name of the tune is for America today and why we are today nothing more than a Roman Empire even today. The United States government is a Vatican Jesuit Jesuit institution, period. End of sentence. And anybody who's ever done any research on Washington, D.C. and the founding of America know that the Vatican is the bottom line for the rule in America, which ultimately influences the whole world. So I'm just saying that there's a lot more for us to learn. I think the reason why it's so difficult for people to learn new tricks, we say old dogs don't learn new tricks. I think the reason why it's so difficult is because most people have the attitude in life which is expressed in the Bible in the New Testament as the Pharisees. You have to ask yourself, when Jesus is condemning the Pharisees, there was at least a dozen different groups, supposedly group of ancient Jewish people, according to the history and the story that were given. There was about 10 to 12 groups of Jews, and all of them having different belief systems and different ideas. But in the Bible, it only has in the New Testament Jesus condemning one or two, the scribes and the Pharisees. But he really rant and raves and condemns the scribes and the Pharisees. Well, who were the scribes? Well, the scribes scribble. We got our word scribbling from scribe. So the scribes that Jesus condemned were the scribblers of Scripture. Scripture, scribes, scribble. So they scribbled the words, and so they were the writers. The people who wrote all the religious literature were the scribes. They wrote down so that people could learn from the religion by reading the book. And so the scribes were condemned, as Jesus said, they were liars and they misled people. And then there was the Pharisee. Look up in the encyclopedia. A Pharisee was a lawyer. And the lawyers represented the state. They don't give a damn about the truth. They represent Caesar. And so even the Jews who were Pharisees were the lawyers, and the Jewish lawyers. And so Jesus rant and raved about the Jewish lawyers who lie and deceive and become wealthy by manipulating people and stealing their property, etc. So then there were two groups of Jews that Jesus rant and raved about, and that was the scriptural writers, people who write all these holy books that the bookstores are just filled to the brim with all kinds of goofballs who write about this, that, and the other thing for Christians to read, and then the lawyers, the Jewish lawyers. So I'm just saying that when you look at the religions today, just have an open mind and understand that nothing we're reading today, nothing we understand today is what it was 2,000 years ago. In the first century, first 100 years of Christianity bears no resemblance to Christianity today at all, period. That should, but nobody, including the priests and the clergy, actually know where these words have come from, why we have candles in a service, and the connection between candles on an altar and an erection in sex is people have no idea where the concept of the candle came from, and they have no idea what the ritual singing of hymns has to do with mind control and the frequencies of mind control, and why churches are built on the particular way they are built with these steeples. And steeples represent, according to dictionaries and encyclopedias, will tell you that church steeples represent a male phallic. And many people know that. So the point I'm making is the entire superstructure of what we call the religious world, be it Christian or Jewish or Hindu, all has to do with the phenomenally basic world we live in. Sex, the stars, money and corruption, control and government is all a mess, and it's all designed for the picking of the people for what they want. They know not everybody is going to want to be a Jew, not everybody is going to want to be a Catholic, not everybody is going to want to be Mohammedan, not everybody is going to want to be what everybody else is. So they have to provide the human family with all kinds of alternatives and ideas. And some people don't like this and that. That sounds like Jehovah's Witnesses. So people will join the Jehovah's Witnesses. Some people don't like this and that about the government. Well, that sounds like Seventh-day Adventists. So they got a church to go, Seventh-day Adventist. And then they found out that, no, this and that's wrong, so we don't like this and that. Well, that sounds like the Church of God in Pasadena. And so when you're through with this, at the end of the period of time, for 2,000 years, we have all kinds of religions. I once read it was like 2,400 so-called Christian religions and cults around the world. 2,400 different Christian churches and ideas around the world. And God knows how many Jewish groups there are. There's all kinds of Jewish groups, and all of them seem to hate each other. And there's Muslim groups who hate each other. And all the different religious groups, they all hate each other. It's a monstrosity of ignorance that the human race is involved in. And unfortunately, I don't think we're going to be able to extricate ourselves out of this mess, because wisdom and knowledge is the only thing that's going to help you. And the people have no knowledge. Even the scripture says, my people are dying from a lack of knowledge. They have haven't got the faintest idea in the world what is really going on the earth that they live on. So that's what I'm trying to do, is just wake people up to the fact that you're not intellectually honest and you really don't know what's going on, and you really actually should go back to school and learn how to read. And if you can read, then put down the magazines and the Paris Hilton stories in your local supermarket and start reading the encyclopedias and dictionaries and go to a library. My God, you still today have a world of knowledge out there on the web. All the encyclopedias of the world are on the web. The dictionaries of the world are all there in every language, and the people are more ignorant today than they've ever been. So that tells me that most of the web is being used for entertainment, and almost nothing out there is being used to educate the human mind. And what makes it even worse is that the government of the United States does not want you to know what's going on. The government is so corrupt today, it does not want you to understand anything. That's why they make damn sure that you have a liquor store on every corner in every city, period, so they can make liquor available to everybody. They will always have a drink for you to keep you intoxicated. They always have the titillating stories about sex and drugs and mafiosis and gangsters with movies. The system wants to make sure that you are continually occupied drinking alcohol, shooting drugs, selling drugs, involved in corruption, anything to keep you busy so you don't look at really who owns you.
Okay.
Well, first of all, if you go to encyclopedias of history, going back to the Roman Empire, go to the early history of the Christian church, and you will find that in Rome, the earliest Christians, this is from an encyclopedia, not from me, the earliest Christians were referred to by Romans as atheists. They did not believe in God. Why? They were atheists. Why? Is because they did not believe in the Roman God. And since in Rome, the Romans understood thoroughly that their gods, the many different gods of the ancient Roman Empire, was absolutely, definitively, without a doubt, absolute God. And if you did not accept the Roman gods as an absolute truth, then you were obviously, in point of fact, an atheist, because you do not believe in Rome's God. Something is overshadowing us. Listen to what I'm going to tell you. You may have heard this before, but if you haven't, listen closely. Have you ever heard the connection between Abraham Lincoln and John Kennedy, the president?
Yeah, actually I have. So I've spent a lot of time.
Okay, well
on Kennedy,
let me read it. Let me read this to the people who haven't. If you've never heard this, then listen closely. Abraham Lincoln was elected to Congress in 1846. John Kennedy was elected to Congress in 1946. Abraham Lincoln was elected president in 1860. John F. Kennedy was elected president in 1960. The names Lincoln and Kennedy each contain 7 letters. Both presidents were particularly concerned with civil rights. Both wives of both presidents lost children while living in the White House. Both presidents were shot on a Friday. Both presidents were shot in the head. President Lincoln's secretary was named Miss Kennedy. Kennedy's secretary was named Miss Lincoln. Both were assassinated by Southerners. Both were succeeded by Southerners. Both successors to both presidents were both named Johnson. Andrew Johnson, who succeeded Lincoln, was born in 1808. Lyndon Johnson, who succeeded Kennedy, was born in 1908. John Wilkes Booth, who assassinated Lincoln, was born in 1839. Lee Harvey Oswald, who was said to have assassinated Kennedy, was born in 1939, exactly 100 years apart. Both assassins were known by their 3 names. Both names are comprised of 15 letters. Lincoln was shot at a theater called Ford. Kennedy was shot in a car made by Ford called Lincoln. John Wilkes Booth, ran from a theater and was caught in a warehouse. Oswald ran from a warehouse and was caught in a theater. Both Oswald and Booth were assassinated before they could go to trial. All of these coincidences are not coincidences. This all seems to be telling you a story, that things are happening all around you and they're mysterious. Why these dates? Why these connections behind the scenes? So the world is filled with strange things. Like I said, the book, The Complete Works of Charles Fort, give you a whole book full of things which have never been figured out why they happen. So I'm just saying that the world is being overshadowed by something that mankind calls God. But you have no idea what that word means. You have no real idea about what you're talking about. So you need to define your terms and wake up and get and train yourself to be intellectually honest. And then you will see how much you don't know, how much you don't understand. And then you will begin to ask questions. And that's what the human brain was designed to do, is wake up, grow up, become adult, and ask questions and begin to train your mind to be intellectually honest and look at the facts and look up the facts. Like Steve Allen used to say, there are 2 kinds of facts, the kind you look up and the kind you make up. And so you really need to understand where the words come from. As I said to you before, Christians go to church, but have no idea in the world where the word church really actually came from and what it actually means and what it's based on. Once you break down these words and terms and symbols, catchphrases, and begin to look at the history of where your religion came from, you're going to find, like everybody else in the world, there's very, very few people who actually have done their homework and understand what it is they think they believe, and at least can understand, make a decent proposal for you to understand what they believe. Most people just believe something. They don't know what they believe. They have no idea where any of it comes from, and that's all I'm trying to do, is to point out to people how much they don't know. I've done a lot of research on words, terms, symbols, and catchphrases. There's just an enormous amount of material on my research society.
A whole lot of people are awake and aware and conscious of what's actually happening. This is also extremely false. They've been purposely put to sleep and purposely misguided. And again, I love to blame the United States, but they're not the only place where this is done. It's everywhere, right?
People really believe whatever it is that their culture believes in, or whatever their culture has adopted as their national religion, etc. Everybody is staunchly connected to that, and they believe it's the absolute truth. And yet you get on the plane and go to another country nearby, and they've got a whole different view on everything, and they are fighting for it. Boy, they'll fight you to protect their understanding of their culture and the way they see things. But where does this stuff end? Because obviously nobody has got the truth. I mean, I came across that many years ago. So many people are looking for truth. Yeah, that's fine. But if you think you have found the ultimate knowledge on the world and the ultimate knowledge of the universe, the use of words, you need to look at the words you use and understand where they came from. And, I mean, I could talk for hours just on the use of words. A classic example is the word Semitic. This is one of the real bothersome subjects to me, is when I hear people using the word Semitic. And if you say anything about the Middle East or the Jewish religion, then you are anti-Semitic. First of all, there's a world of difference between the sun and the moon, between north and south, between wet and dry. So there's a world of difference between anti-Semitic and anti-Jewish. Two different words. Anti-Jewish means that you are against Jews, period. But anti-Semitic, if you look it up in a dictionary, which most people don't, but if you look it up in a dictionary, anti-Semitic, the word Semitic, is applied to about 13 different races of people on the earth. 13 different countries and ancient cultures of the world are we recall as Semitic cultures. And so if you're anti-Semitic, that means you are anti-13 different countries and races and cultures of the world that you didn't even know were Semitic. So I'm just saying, go back and look at the words you use, because when you say anti-Semitic, no, you should say anti-Jewish. Now that nails it down to one group. Semitic opens you up to 13 different races of peoples in the world. So that alone is just an example. I've even got a bigger example we could talk about in the next hour about the word Semitic, because it's actually a non-existing term. It's an illegitimate term to use the word Semitic. So when you hear professors and teachers and religious leaders and whoever else in colleges and universities use the word Semitic, just know that they don't know, or if they do, they're just lying. They don't know that it is an illegitimate term. There is, in point of fact, nothing to the word Semitic, which is actually in the world we live in. Semitic is a word that only an ignorant person would use. There is no such a thing as anything Semitic. Why? Because where does that word come from? Where do you get the word Semitic? And then when you find out you get the word Semitic from something that did not exist at all, something which was non-existent, it was just a dreamt-up idea, like so many other ideas expressed in religion were just dreamt up by somebody that has no basis in fact whatsoever. So there is nothing to the word Semitic. Don't even use it. It's a word that has no basis about anything. There is no such a thing as Semitic. If you use the word Semitic at all, it implies that you are ignorant and ill-informed and unread, because intelligent people who have a very good rounded education of the world they live in would not use the word Semitic. It's a word you don't use in public unless you don't know. If you're ignorant and ill-informed, you use words, and people who are wise and intelligent will know, obviously, that you don't know what you're talking about. I mean, I like that scripture. Basically, it says in the Bible to keep your mouth shut and let everyone think that you're a fool, instead of opening your mouth and proving it. It comes from the word Shem. Actually, originally it's Shemitic, and then we take it and change it in our English today. We call it Semitic. No, it's Shemitic, S-H. And it comes from the story in the Bible of Noah and the ark. And Noah and the ark, we'd all have heard, Noah had his wife, and then he had 3 sons, and they had 3 wives. So there was Noah and his wife, and his 3 sons, and their 3 wives. So now we're talking about 8 people. We know that if you take the letter 8 and lay it down on its side, it becomes a symbol for infinity. You can ask any Jewish rabbi, any rabbinical authority, what is the symbolism in Judaism for the number 8? Is it important? And then you will have to sit for an hour while the rabbi explains to you all of the mysticism in the Jewish religion based on the number 8. And the first thing he will tell you is that 8, when it's laid down on its side, becomes a symbol for infinity, because 8 is the only number that you can write on a piece of paper with a pen or a pencil and never take your never lift the pen from the paper. You can make the 8 backwards and forwards. You can make the 8 continual and never lift your pen or pencil off the paper. And so, as I said, you lay it down on its side and it becomes a symbol for infinity, forever. You just sit there and draw an 8 forever. And so 8 has a symbolic meaning in the Jewish religion. So already it's very questionable about there were 8 people on the Ark of Noah. The second and most important point about the word Semitic is that one of Noah's sons, he had 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Shem, Ham, and Japheth. So therefore we're supposed today to have 3 major lineages of humans on the earth. The Shemitic, which we call Semitic, and the Hamitic, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And the Japhetic. Well, first of all, there was no Noah and the ark to start with. It's just a story. It was taken from a far more ancient story in the Middle East, the Gilgamesh epic.
Yeah, the Epic of Gilgamesh. And this is, the funny thing is that's the most recognizable one, but quite honestly, as you well know, there is more than one place where one can find the template long before the Old Testament or the...
Oh, absolutely. No doubt about it. I just was thinking about that particular one. It's so well known that it's called the Gilgamesh epic.
Right.
And the story goes back to the old ancient Sumerians, 1,000 years before Noah would have even been born. 1,000 years before Noah would have existed. And the story was that in the Gilgamesh epic is an ancient story about how God was going to flood the earth, and so he told the great king to gather his family and take all the animals and put them into an ark, and he's going to destroy the earth, etc., etc. Well, so today we have in the Old Testament the old Gilgamesh epic, but we call it the Ark of Noah, Noah's Ark. And so we now know that it was just a story based on an earlier story. And so if that's true, which it is provable, we know that's true, then that means there was no Noah and there was no ark. Well, if there was no Noah and no ark, then there was no Shem, Ham, or Japheth. And there was no 8 people who came off the ark. We know that is true, and there was no such ark. Then you break it all down, and you finally see, no, the story of Noah and the ark and his 3 sons and all of that was a beautiful story, but it just goes back 1,000 years earlier to another time and another story from another culture. So therefore, there was... You can see strata cut in the mountainside and the hills where the strata was erupted. Yes, there was absolutely terrible destruction that did happen on the earth, and it did cause a horrible flood. Yes, and the flood is part of so many hundreds of cultures in the world, from Native Americans, Africans, Asians, people from Europe, Russia. There are all these ancient cultures and peoples. They talk about a massive flood, and I am of the opinion that's exactly what happened. There was a massive flood, but there wasn't no Noah and there was no ark, but there was a flood. And the flood, I am totally convinced, after looking at the subject for 60 years, is what Plato was talking about when he talked about Atlantis. It says that Atlantis was destroyed. It was an enormous continent like or similar to Australia. It's not just a little island. No, it was a huge island. It was a continent. And it was from what Plato said, Solon, the Egyptian mystical teacher, told the ancient Greeks that there was a great and enormous continent in the Atlantic Ocean. It's not there today, but at one time there was a great continent in the Atlantic, and it was called Atlantis, from which we get the word Atlantis. And so the story goes from Solon, the Egyptian teacher, told Plato and the other Greeks that this great continent, the size and as large as Australia, in one day and one night went under the ocean. Well, we understand how that could be because if you go back and read the scriptures in Genesis about the destruction of Atlantis, and that's what it's talking about in the Bible in Genesis, and it says, in one day and one night, the deep opened up. It not only rained for many, many days hard all over that area of the earth, was heavy, terrible rains and flooding, but it says the ground of the deep, talking about the floor of the ocean, it says the deep cracked open and the continent fell into the ocean. They fell through the crack in the ocean that was holding holding the continent up, but the floor of the ocean, the Bible says, was cracked, and the whole entire continent dropped into the ocean, and the waters came over, and it's gone forever. Well, then, if that were to happen, you can imagine if Australia was to drop down many, many, many miles in 1 hour, drop down into the ocean because the ocean plate opened up and the whole continent went under. You can imagine that it's going to cause one hell of a reaction all over the earth. And people for thousands of years will remember and tell their children about the great event of a great continent being destroyed in just an hour or two, a few hours, and it was gone forever. Well, that's the story of Atlantis, that the waters of the deep broke open and the world fell into it, and it was a great flood. Well, I understand that. That makes sense. And so I believe Atlantis actually existed, and I think that's probably where Adam and Eve were created. I think there's probably a lot of interesting things that we read in the Bible actually was talking about something that happened in Atlantis, because the Atlantis story does say what the Bible said. It was destroyed overnight. It was a great flood, and the continent and the whole world of that time dropped into the ocean. If Japan had gone under because of the plates holding up the Pacific Ocean were to really crack, and Japan as a nation just sunk under. Within 24 hours, it was gone forever. And millions of people died instantly, and it's gone forever. You can bet that story will chase the world for thousands of years to come. They will be talking about the great tsunami and the great earthquake in which millions of people died instantly. Yeah, well, that's what the Bible talks about, how the whole world was consumed by water and people died. And it goes back to the Gilgamesh. So the bottom line is, yeah, there's the stories out there, but you need to go back and look at where the stories came from. And if there was no, like I said, if there was no Noah and the ark and his wife and 3 sons, then there was no Shem. And if there was no Shem, then there was no Shemitic people. And if there's no Shemitic people, then there was no Semitic people. Just a word we use. And so that's why I'm saying there was no need to use the word Semitic, because it's based on Shemitic, and that was one of the sons of Noah who didn't exist. So that's the name of that too. When you get back to Christ, we talk about the anti-Semitic. Well, anti-Christ is another term that's being used that people have no idea what it means. You have to understand it's 2 words. One's anti and one's Christ. Most people using the term anti-Christ have no comprehension at all what the word Christ means and where did it come from. And so people say, well, Christ was the Messiah. No, actually, the word Christ simply means oil. This is why we have something like Crisco. Crisco, the company Crisco, makes a Crisco oil. It's a cooking oil, but it's called Cristo. Actually, that's not correct, Cristo. It actually, in Greek, is Christo. Christo becomes Crisco. Well, Christo is an oil in Greek, and so therefore, Crisco, well, it is a cooking oil. But it's based on Christo, which is a Greek word, but in the Latin it becomes Crisco. And so therefore, today we have a cooking oil called Crisco, which is Christ in Greek. So Christ means oil. And I'll get back to that in just a minute about the oil. That's a whole different subject. But to have an anti-Christ, we think of anti meaning against Christ. Something which, in our language today, we say somebody's anti. That means he's against something. But that's not what the word in Greek means. Ask anybody who understands the Greek language, they'll tell you the word anti does not mean to be against anything. So when you say something where somebody was anti-Christ, well, he's against Christ. No. Anti in Greek means to actually be the Christ. They are not saying they're against somebody being Christ. They want to be Christ. So it's actually they want to be in the place of someone else. So if you're saying you're anti-Christ, it means you're not against Christ. You want to be Christ. So it's not against, but you want to be the Christ yourself. And so I can understand why I don't have any problem with using the term Napoleon was an antichrist or Hitler was an antichrist. If you understand it correctly, what the word Christ means, it means a Messiah or one who is anointed for power, and that Hitler wanted to be anointed for power himself. You don't want to give it to Christ. He wants it. So, okay, well then it doesn't mean Hitler's against Jesus. It means he wants to be Jesus. He wants to be the Christ. So in that way, I understand, okay, that word makes sense. That Hitler would be an antichrist. Antichrist, not the. Because today, all over the world, all men seem to want to be an anti in the original Greek use of the word, not Latin. Everybody seems to want to be what somebody else is. Everybody wants to be Steven Spielberg. Well, there's only one of him, so you're not going to be him. Well, we want to be like Muhammad Ali. Well, yeah, but the whole human race wants to be like somebody else. And so, well, that's anti in the original ancient Greek. Doesn't mean you're against Muhammad Ali. It means you want to be like him. So that's what the word antichrist simply means. Somebody who wants to be like Christ. He wants to be the Christ. And so that it doesn't mean you're against anything. It just means you want to be instead of the one that is, you want to be.
Well,
Anything which is everywhere, all over, is Catholic. That's a word that is used as not the name of a church. It's a word in Latin which means universal. It's big. It's all over the world. And so people, the human race, is Catholic, period. Why? Because there's people everywhere. Doesn't mean they belong to a particular church. No, the word in Latin simply means people are everywhere. Anything that's everywhere is all over, is referred to as Catholic. So, today we have the Roman Catholic religion, which is the religion of the ancient Roman Empire, based on the ancient Grecian Empire, which had based itself on the great empires of the Middle East and India and Asia Minor. The Roman Empire has actually dominated the world and dominated Europe, especially for over 2,000 years ago. The Roman Empire, dominated Europe. Well, over 2,000 years ago, Europe has dominated the world. So all roads lead to Rome. Rome has been dominating Europe and the Middle East for about 2,500 years, and it's been dominating Europe for 2,500 years. Well, yeah, but Europe has dominated the earth for 2,500 years. And so the bottom line is that Europe is now pretty much dominated the globe. All the major European countries of Europe all have their subsidiary operations all over the earth. The French are in Africa, they're in Asia, the British are in Asia, Africa, and in Egypt. The Germans, my God, they're everywhere, the Americans. So these ancient cultures all go back to Rome, to the Roman Empire. And when we get back into religion, Moses did all of his magical miracles with the magic wands. Moses in Washington, D.C., in the Capitol today, is carrying a large magic wand. Jesus is pictured all over Europe and around the world in Christian churches, waking people from the dead, healing the sick and the poor with a magic wand. That's all history. Go back and look at it. Just go there and see it. And then, talking about Moses again, why is it, and go on the web and go to image and type in Moses with horn, and you will find that Moses is always pictured in any representation, a carving, statues, stained glass, pictures in books. No matter where you see a picture of Moses, he always is horn. He always has horns on his head, like the devil. He has horns. So go back and look at the pictures with Moses with horn and on the web, and see how many hundreds and hundreds of pictures around the world showing Moses with horns like the devil. Why is Moses pictured around the world with horns? The horns on the devil comes directly from an ancient Greek god named Bacchus Dionysus.
Yes.
Bacchus Dionysus had horn, and if you go and look up the word Bacchus Dionysus, you will see this ancient Greek god is exactly what we today in the modern day world picture in our minds, the devil. He's this long face, long big horns, evil look in his eye, evil, carrying a pitchfork, and he looks demonic. He looks frightening. This god Bacchus Dionysus, and he has grape all around him. He's the grape. He's the wine, the god who drinks he drinks the wine of the grapes. And he's called Bacchus Dionysus, or just Bacchus. And it's just simply the picture of the devil. And so that's where we get this picture of the devil in our minds, not from Satan, but from Bacchus Dionysus, who we have been presented by the churches. He is a classic example of what the churches would like you to understand the devil to be, this scary-looking demonic creature with horns and these eyes, which are demonic eyes. He's got a pitchfork, and he's evil. But that's a Greek god named Dionysus, Bacchus Dionysus. And so that's where we get that.
Yeah,
but the
even though he's the God of one.
Yeah, we're told that Moses, led the people of Israel, led the children of Israel. I mean, Israel has children. They were called the children of Israel. We don't have children. We have kids. Those are baby goats. So the children of Israel were Israeli offspring, and they referred to in the Bible as children. So they were the children of Israel. But today you don't have children. Today you have kids, which are baby goats. I don't know what that's telling. But the mere fact that Moses was leading the Israelites in endless search for a place to live in the wilderness, and so the people became very hungry and started belly aching about the fact that they used to eat so well in Egypt, and now they're not eating at all. And so Moses asked God to feed the people so they won't die, and feed the people and keep their mouth shut and keep them happy. Please feed them. So God gave the people of Israel, the children of Israel, manna from heaven. Well, that's another subject. What was the manna from heaven that God was feeding the people, and Moses was leading the people each morning to go out and pick up off the ground something called the manna from heaven. That's another story that we need to get into when you find out what manna actually meant, and the whole story about how God fed the ancient Israelite people with the manna from heaven. There's so many other stories that we can investigate, but just keep in mind that religion is far, far different than you think it is, and nothing you've read in the Bible, nothing you've ever heard in your life about your religion. There is no particular one religion. All the religions of the world have come from somewhere, and everybody thinks they have the truth, and in point of fact, there virtually is no truth. You need to go back, because like Steve Allen, my dear friend Steve Allen, used to say, there are two kinds of fact: the kind you look up and the kind you make up. And that's what the world's religions and governments and all of our human societies are made up of facts. No truth in any of them.